Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are going to start to join us eventually, this is Mental Health Live, #MHLive, a Bell Let's Talk Day special. Today's the day that I started my podcast a year ago called Normal, in which I've been privileged to have conversations with more than 60 people so far. I'd only set out to do 50. So we're wrapping it up today. A year later, so it'll end up being 65 episodes later, wrapping it up and instead doing something a bit different, doing a live cast. So I have a producer over on the West Coast, the incredible Rudy Caceres. I like to say his name with a little bit of spice. And I know he likes that too. I'm going to bring Rudy in a few minutes to introduce himself. But first, I want to jump right into our first guest because it's very early on the West Coast as well. So give Rudy a few more minutes to sleep. I'm going to bring in Jeremie Saunders over here, and we're doing this live, so it's going to look live. If we mix up the lower thirds down here every now and then, just don't worry about it. We'll get it right eventually. So Jeremie Saunders is the host of a bunch of podcasts. I'm going to get him to tell us more about himself. But Sickboy especially and Turn Me On have been massively successful, and I think there's one other over there too somewhere. So let's bring Jeremie in. Jer, how are you?
Hello, I'm great, man. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining me. You're in Halifax right now?
Yes. Yeah, beautiful Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's been really great over here. We've had a pretty decent winter. Somehow I managed to sneak down to LA for our only major snowstorm. So nice. I feel pretty fortunate these days living here. Yeah.
So for those who don't know who you are, which I can't imagine why they wouldn't, you have probably one of the most successful podcasts in Canada, at least I think so, Sickboy, you and your buddy. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so about 4 or 5 years ago, me and my two best friends decided to sit down and just have a chat on mics and record a conversation between the three of us where we talked at length about what my experience was like living with cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic lung disease. And we kind of did this just as an experiment, kind of for a laugh. The idea was to have this conversation, find some humor, some levity, share some stories within my experience of living with CF, but really to find the humor that existed within that experience.
Yeah, and it's a really funny show. You wouldn't think that show about disease and death.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't take us long. We were talking about death and we were talking about scariest moments of our lives, but we always somehow managed to find the light and the levity within those situations. And that led to us deciding to want to try it again. And so we reached out to our close friend, Matthew, who had brain cancer, and he came in and chatted with us. And then the next thing we knew, someone that we didn't know but was friends of ours wanted to come on and talk to us about her experience with bipolar. And then somebody else asked if they could come on and do the same thing with their disease or their illness that they were dealing with. And the ball just kind of kept rolling from there. And the next thing we knew, we were producing a weekly podcast where this was the theme. We sit down with people living with chronic or terminal disease or struggling with mental health, and we talk to them about their experience. But we always try to find that humor that exists within that common human experience.
Now, did you already have kind of a gallows humor about your own diagnosis at that point?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's honestly been something that I've kind of attributed to my well-being for my entire life. I've always found laughter to be one of the greatest forms of alternative therapy for myself. Yeah. In two parts for that, because number one is that laughing is actually really great for a set of lungs with cystic fibrosis. Right. What's happening with our lungs is unlike asthma where the airways are kind of restricted or closing off, my airways are filled with mucus. And so to get that mucus out, a lot of times we'll cough or, there's breathing exercises we can do. It's basically forcing air out to kind of push that mucus out of the way. Yeah. Laughing does that. Just the mechanics of laughing. You are, especially a really good hearty laugh, you are just forcing air up constantly.
So it's literally very therapeutic for you.
Yeah, exactly. But then on top of that, it just, it made me see the world through a lens of mockery, and in turn, I could look at the hardships that I've been going through, or that I am going through, and it made things a little bit easier, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Well, and this is still very current for you as well, isn't it? I mean, you were just in hospital not that long ago.
Yeah, in October, I was actually in Boston, and I got really sick, and basically had two options: either try to navigate the medical system in the U.S., which I'm not too familiar with, and it was a little scary. So instead, I just bought a ticket that day, flew home, went straight to the hospital, and was admitted for a few weeks for pneumonia.
Pneumonia. Yeah, no, I mean, I imagine if you have CF, I don't know a lot about the disease. Actually, everything that I do know, I probably have learned from you talking about it. But I would imagine that's a pretty high risk situation when somebody with CF gets pneumonia. Yeah,
it's pneumonia. Pneumonia is definitely one of those illnesses that can really knock you down. It's the worry is always it's a progressive disease, so over time the lung function starts to decline, and eventually you'll get to a point where the lungs really have no other option to continue on, and the next step would be a double lung transplant. So every time I come down with an illness like pneumonia, or I get a really bad bout of any sort of respiratory illness, it just kind of knocks me down another peg. And the hope is over time to lengthen the gaps between those moments, so that we don't have to worry about what comes next in the end stage of CF.
So, I mean, you've talked very eloquently and humorously, of course. Your TEDx Toronto talk, I was privileged to be live in the audience when you were doing it. Still one of my favorite TEDx talks. Just from a technical perspective too, the way that you owned that audience, it was just you were really good at it. Yeah, and we're going to share it through here later too, because I think everybody should see it. But you talk a lot in that about the decline, almost the expected decline, because it is a degenerative disease. But you've already outlived expectations that were set when you were first diagnosed. What's that like for you, knowing that you're going to die probably early?
Yeah, that's been a huge driving force in my life. In that talk, I explain how, I believe it was in that talk, but I have talked at length about how early days when I first realized that CF was a life-threatening, life-shortening illness, it had a pretty negative effect on my mental health, on my overall like well-being as I moved through the world.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, there was kind of a click, and I started to realize what a gift that was. I started to really take the fact that, okay, if I'm sitting here and I have this number looming over my head, and at my early days, that number was 30. So I'd always thought, like, maybe I'll make it to 30.
Right.
That notion of knowing that I only have 15 years left, really kind of like lit a fire under my ass to do anything and everything that I possibly could to squeeze out every last minute of life, right?
Yeah. And you did something in that talk, I think that's an important reminder for that, to get people to set the alarm in their phone. I've thought about stealing that ever since, but I was like, no, thing, I can't do that. Can you talk a little bit about what the point of that exercise is?
Yeah, so the whole exercise, I basically told everyone to consider what they think they would feel. First, I asked everyone, how long do you think truly that you have left? Like, is it 30 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 5 years? What if it was 5 days? And then I think I used like 8 hours or 6 hours. I used a number that was within the span of most people's evening through the entire event, so that everyone would still likely be together. And I said, why don't you whip out your phone right now and set an alarm on the phone to go off 6 hours from this minute right here. And live your life as though once that 6 hours is up, that's it. There's no coming back.
Mhm.
How would you live your life differently?
Yeah.
What would be the small things that you do? Obviously, we're here at this event, TEDx Toronto. You're not going to like run off and try to find a plane to go skydiving in just in time to check that off your bucket list. But you're here. You're in the confines of this building, hanging out with these people. Maybe you'll walk up to someone and strike up a conversation that you might not have thought you had the courage to do if you knew you only had 6 hours left. So the idea was just to encourage people to kind of get out of their comfort zone a little bit and live just a little more critically.
Yeah.
Because again, the idea of living to, I can sit here and say, well, I think with cystic fibrosis, I might now make it to 35.
Right.
Yeah, maybe. I also might make it to 80. I mean, who knows? That sounds awful, but who knows? Let's say I could make it to 80. I could also walk out today after our conversation and get in the car, and that could be the end of me after getting struck by a bus or something. So we really truly never know.
So how do you and I don't want to take up too much of your time here. I could probably talk to you forever. But how do you not I mean, of course there's the biological piece of depression and of getting beaten down that way.
Yeah.
But there's also a huge environmental and life circumstance piece. How do you not fall into depression or how do you get out of it if you do?
I've always really, personally, I've always really relied on having like a really key network of people that I value in my life around me at all times for that kind of support. The diagnosis of depression is not uncommon. It's almost comorbid with cystic fibrosis. We have a very, whenever I go to the CF clinic, it's mandatory that I sit down with a psychologist and we talk about how I'm doing. Wow. Because it's not uncommon for people with cystic fibrosis to struggle with their mental health. Yeah. And I've always found that in those moments, and there have been a few, where I start to slip down into a bit of a darker period. The two things that really, really help bring me out of that is ensuring that I'm doing the thing that I like absolutely feel like I need to do, like what I've been put on this earth to do, which is to be creative and help tell and share stories. Yeah. But the second, and I think most important thing, is to surround myself with that key network of people that I really trust and value and love. Yeah. My wife plays a huge role in that. She gives me the space to navigate those times when things are low, but also is aware of who I am enough to kind of pull me back if I get too close to the deep end.
When you fall into it, you often don't know that you're in the cave because it's so dark.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Taylor and Brian, my co-hosts of Sickboy, like they too are just a really important, vital part of my social surrounding. And the thing that I value the most in those people is knowing that if times get tough, I'm not going to be a burden on them. Right. To rely on what they have to offer, to rely on their support. And that was something that I think I struggled with a lot when I was younger, especially dealing with CF. Is like I would never get caught taking my medication in front of people. I would never, if I was out and if I missed 2 weeks of school because I had pneumonia and I was in the hospital and I came back, I would do everything I could to find a lie to express that I was actually on vacation or something. Right. Because I just never wanted to. I never wanted to feel like woe is me. I never wanted to feel like I was pouring all of my bullshit onto somebody else. But that's no way to live. Like that's no way to get by.
I feel like that's a very Canadian thing too. It's like we want to be
Yeah,
polite and not inconvenience people, right? Have you
absolutely.
noticed this in a theme in the, well, how many episodes of Sick Boy have you done? How many people have you talked to?
We've done I believe it's like 226 episodes,
Wow,
something like that.
that's incredible. So have you noticed a theme among those 200 plus guests? Does everybody experience that kind of, whether it's shame or not wanting to be a burden or whatever it is? Do a lot of people grapple with that across conditions?
That's one thing that's really stuck out to Brian, Taylor, and myself. We were actually talking about this the other day about how when we first started the show, one of the big key points that we wanted to ensure we were sticking to when releasing episodes. So we do 4 episodes a month, right? Every Monday, give or take 4 episodes a month, depending on how many Mondays are in the month. We don't really have a strategy in terms of what illness we want to cover within that month. Really, it's just whatever's kind of sticking out to us and interests us for that week. But one thing that we did want to ensure that we did was to release at least one episode a month that touched on mental health issue.
Okay.
Whether that's depression or bipolar or anything within the mental health spectrum. Like we were like, let's ensure that we do it at least once a month.
Right.
And then oddly enough, we started to realize that every person we're having in, whether they're coming in with Crohn's, whether they're coming in with endometriosis, they're coming in to talk about infertility, they're coming in to talk about cystic fibrosis, they're coming in to talk about, X-linked Y, like something that I've never heard of in my entire life. The one key thread between all of it is we'd always end up in this conversation about like, how's your mental health?
Yeah.
Because everyone would kind of navigate into that space of like, and because of the scenario I'm in, it affects me socially. Like I've developed social anxiety, or it, I have a really hard time getting out of bed sometimes when it's really bad, and then I get caught up in that, and it has an effect on the rest of my month. Or so like that we would always kind of come back to the themes that we would know we were going to touch in these episodes where we knew we were specifically talking about mental health. And that was like a big wake-up call for me also to realize that like, whoa, yeah, that's living with a chronic illness very often also means trying to navigate and trying to also juggle and take care of your own mental health, because they're so linked.
Yeah.
That was one thing that really struck me.
Yeah.
The other thing that kind of ties almost every single episode together is the fact that we ask this 2-part question almost at the end of every episode, which is, what's the biggest thing that your illness has taken away from you? And what's the biggest thing that your illness has given you? And the answer almost every single time when it comes to what has it given you is something along the lines of like, it's given me a deeper appreciation for the time that I have left.
Yeah.
Or it's given me
would that be your answer as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's given me, and and every time someone says it, they go, I know it's going to sound corny, but it doesn't sound corny. Like it makes so much sense to me. And I feel the same way. It's like, it's given me a perspective on how to really appreciate living.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, because in my case, I've spent so much time thinking about dying.
Yeah.
That it has forced me to really bathe in the experience of living.
Yeah.
And
well, I think you're helping
for that.
I think you're helping so many other people to do that too, because sometimes I think we all want to feel that way, and we all need the encouragement to do that, but we need somebody to open the door. That it's hard to take that first step yourself. So
it's like one of those things that we know, but we kind of forget we know it until somebody tells us or puts it into a certain perspective, and you go, oh yeah,
Right.
I'm alive.
It's good to have reminders that we're alive, and I think your Sickboy podcast does that. Where else can people find it? I mentioned Turn Me On as well.
Yeah, Turn Me On podcast. It's another podcast that I host with my wife. We had a lot of fun with that one. You can find us basically Turn Me On podcast and Sickboy podcast anywhere that you find find podcasts on the web, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, what have you. And then personally, if you're ever looking to reach out, at Jeremie Saunders on Twitter and at Jeremie Saunders on Instagram, and I'm always down to chat. So you can add me there, and I'm always down to chat with you, Mark. I mean, also, can I just say congratulations on a really, really wonderful year. Like, so the podcast is coming to a close, but you're going to continue things with these live streams.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to do. I mean, I had only set out to do, I shouldn't say only because it's still a lot, but I had set out to do 50 episodes of the podcast. And we did 60, or I guess technically 65, because the finale, I'm ending it with my own story. And I was emphatic when we started the podcast. I'm sick of talking about myself.
Right.
So that's why we talked to so many other really great people, including yourself. Sickboy. So we're going to wrap it up with my story, and then do some more live streams, and I've got a few other things as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, it was an honor to be a part of it, and you should be proud.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Yeah.
Take care, Jeremy. All right, Jeremie Saunders. So you can get his Sickboy podcast, Turn Me On. Follow him on social media. He's really a great guy, and your life will be better if you follow some of the work that he and his friends do.